The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers or Rogers TV.
Welcome to Health Matters. I'm your host, Dr. Lana Marconi. On this episode, we're going to explore some legal issues associated with health, and then we're going to shift into the aging brain. Kindly welcome my first guest, Andy Samachuk. He is an immigration attorney, and he is a member of the bar here in Ontario, British Columbia, New York, and California. Welcome, Andy.
Thanks, Lana.
Thanks for being here. So I want to talk to you about medical records and immigration. There was a big story in the newspapers last year in 2013 about a woman, Ellen Richardson.
Yes.
She was in her 50s. She spent about $6,000 to go on a Caribbean cruise. She went to the Toronto airport, and she was turned away by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Two things. She was hospitalized for depression in 2012, and she'd been paraplegic since 2001 due to an unsuccessful suicide. Help us to piece together this puzzle. Why was this woman denied entry?
Okay, well, according to media reports, she was on a trip going down to New York. She was going to be on a cruise ship, I guess. But when she came to the airport, to the Pearson International Airport, she was questioned about the trip. And evidently, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer found an entry on the computer when he scanned her passport to the effect that she had this medical issue, the medical issue being an attempted suicide. And from what I gather, there were actually two attempted suicides, one about 10 years earlier, and then this one that appeared to be the problem, which was the one in 2010. And as I gather, what happened essentially was she was blocked because the immigration officer felt that she might be a risk in terms of harming someone else or perhaps herself. And he had the power under the Immigration and Nationality Act to block her from entering the country, so he did. So
the million-dollar question is, how does the U.S. Department of Homeland Security have the health records of Canadians? In the news article, her lawyer approached the Ontario Health Minister, Deb Matthews, and asked her, you know, what's going on here? Is there some information sharing between Canada and the United States? And the response was, no, for Ontarians traveling to the United States, they're okay, like the medical records aren't shared. The news reporter said, well, if it's not happening on a provincial level, then there's something shady going on the federal level where there's some information sharing, because medical records are private, they're confidential, and another country should not have our medical records. And in another article that I read, it said something to the effect that because she had attempted suicide, and if the police were involved, that would create a law enforcement record, and in which case the two countries do share the database. Right.
That's exactly, I think, what happened. That attempted suicide obviously was somehow reported by the hospital to the RCMP, or was at least entered in the RCMP database, the CPIC so-called database, which is shared with the Americans. And so both police forces knew about the suicide, and as a result, U.S. Customs and Border Protection knew attempted suicide. As a result, U.S. Customs and Border Protection knew about it. But, you know, this is really shady. I mean, what are they going to know next? You know, what if a person has syphilis? Are they going to know about syphilis, or, you know, whatever? It's a very gray area, very disturbing in my view, that such information ended up in the databases of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency.
And is this a form of discrimination? So now you have depression, or you've tried to commit suicide, so are you being discriminated against? You know, somebody was kind of joking in an article saying, well, people in wheelchairs could use a wheelchair to injure themselves. So did they pose a risk to the Department of Homeland Security? You know, how ridiculous is that?
It's stretching it.
And one more thing, I mean, how do these officers, how can they don't have a medical background, so how can they make that judgment?
Right. I think it's a good point. It's a good case to make the point that it's really stretching what they should have in their database as far as dangers are concerned with respect to America and people coming into the United States. So clearly this is a case that went over the line, but there may be instances where people are actually dangers to the American public, or they may be suicidal, I mean really suicidal and out of control. And I could see why they would want to know about such individuals.
And she was also told that, well, she was turned away, and she was told that she needed an approval letter from a doctor that was approved by the U.S. government, and she'd have to pay something like $500. So does she need a doctor who's registered in the United States, or is it a Canadian doctor that's approved by the U.S. government?
Yeah. That's always been kind of a pet peeve of mine, and it happens for Canada as well. Each country appoints certain doctors in the other's jurisdiction that they're prepared to accept in terms of medical reports for immigrants. In Canada here, the U.S. authorities in the Toronto area, I think they have about 2 or 3 doctors that they're prepared to accept reports from, and these doctors are the ones that a person would have to go to if they want to enter the United States and get medical approval for entry into the United States.
And that still doesn't guarantee that she would be allowed entry. No, that doesn't. That's just a piece of paper. As an immigration attorney, how could you help this lady?
Well, I'd have to meet with her and discuss what happened. There's very little, actually, that I could do in her instance, because the data's already in the computer, and each time she enters the U.S., it's going to come up again. But this is a political thing more than a legal thing, in the sense that politically it's probably information that really shouldn't have been shared with officials in the United States. But in either case, whenever someone does come in with perhaps some kind of issues of this nature, I would sit down with the person involved and discuss, do they have a police record? Do they have any medical issues that might be raised at the border? And then discuss what could be done. Perhaps send the person to these doctors for a medical, and then see what happens at that stage, and see if anything can be done about what the medical conclusions are.
And the $500 that she has to pay?
She has to pay. There's not much you can do about that.
Do you think the federal government is sharing information with the United States
of our
medical records?
Medical records, no. Not all medical records, but obviously something about suicide in that area. Anything that might pose a medical danger, they are sharing.
Wow. Andy, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. Definitely have you back. There's more issues I want to talk to you about for sure in depth. We'll be back more on health matters and a look at the aging brain. Stay tuned. Are you one of the 6 million Canadians who will experience a diagnosable mental illness? Symptoms can include personality change, inability to cope, excessive anxiety or anger, changes in eating or sleeping patterns, talking about suicide, and abuse of alcohol or drugs.